Session 2. Components of a Good Story. In this session of the StoryTogether workshop, we'll look at what makes a story and a storytelling event really good.
You see, good stories don't just happen. We work with story crafters to help them understand that you have a good story when you have a good storyteller and an engaged audience.
Let's use a triangle to illustrate these three important components. When you have the audience, the story, and the storyteller, you have a great storytelling event.
Be on the lookout for a culturally relevant way to talk about the three parts of a good storytelling event. For example, some cultures talk about the three parts of a meal. The grain represents an audience that receives the story. The sauce is like the story that is told. And the spice represents a good storyteller who provides interest in the story.
You want everyone to remember that all three components, the story, the audience, and the storyteller, are needed for a good storytelling event.
What makes a good story? Let's explore that by looking at what you experience on a long journey. Draw a mountain with a clear peak, showing some twists, turns, and bumps along the way. Relate the journey to a story, perhaps the one you just told in the first session.
You're using this mountain journey illustration to show that every story has 5 distinct parts. A plan, a clear beginning, a problem, the peak, the end.
Now let's take a closer look at each step of the journey. To begin with, you've got to have a plan. Don't you want to know where you're going on a journey? Well, in the same way, it's good to know the direction your story is headed. It's important to set the scene and introduce the characters.
When you start a journey, you tell others where you're going. When you begin to tell a story, prepare the audience by telling them if it's a true story or a fable. For example, in English, we start with once upon a time when we're telling a fictional story.
And on a journey, remember how you always encounter a problem. Every journey has problems to solve and bumps and twists to maneuver through. In your workshop, explain how problems and twists in a story lead to the most important point in the story.
Keep in mind that you always reach a peak or climax on your journey. Just as you climb a mountain to reach the peak, in a story, you want to reach a climax. This is usually the most important point or twist in the story. Perhaps it is where you solve the problem or teach the main lesson.
And finally, as you know, in every journey, it has to come to an end. As much as you'd love to stay on that mountain peak, you have to go down. In the same way, every story must end. Be sure that every story you tell has a clear, well-formed conclusion.
By this time in the workshop, your language groups are getting to know each other better. Every person gets to tell a story in their own language, perhaps a story from their childhood or one from their favorite storytellers.
Each language group selects their favorite story to share with the large group. Use the mountain illustration that you just learned to highlight at least 1 or 2 key points from their story.
To help you spur discussion in the large group, look for things like the interaction between the storyteller and the audience. Take a close look at the storyteller's intonation and talk about his voice and body language. Does he make eye contact with the audience?
Ask the group to talk about the structure of the story. Was it suspenseful? Did it have a climax or an unusual twist in the story? Was there a clear resolution?
As you see, this second session gives story crafters a framework to talk about the stories and storytelling events. The word pictures remind everyone that a good story has an audience, the story, and the storyteller. And together, those three elements create a good storytelling event.
The triangle showed us how important it is not just to have a good story, but to have a good storyteller and an engaged audience. And the mountain illustration helped us see all the parts it takes to craft a good story.
These two important word pictures help your language teams craft better Bible stories. Ultimately, what they learn in this session will help them give many more of their people access to Scripture.